Good evening,
Hello, everyone. Hello.
You know what it is. You know how we do it. Super excited for today, Litlokonola. I know just the title of this book has you excited because it has the word "ho" in it.
First of all, I'm now a housewife. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm now a housewife.
Yay!
So, what's really interesting that I wanted to tell Shana is that I literally opened up a Twitter space reading your book because I was just so shook, right? And I couldn't have this experience by myself. And so I allowed people to kind of have the, hey Terry, to kind of have this experience with me. We read like a couple of chapters, and we even finished the book together, and I was completely shook. Like, I know it's a real life story, but like, sure. Anyways, everyone, we have the wonderful privilege. I didn't have my Terry book, but Terry knows I have her book. So we have two wonderful authors today. We have the author of Ougat, From a Hoe into a Housewife, and then some. And then we also have the author of Those Who Live in Cages, Terry, who is a Cheeky Natives fan. Yes, please. Yes. So you see, so these are the two books we have in conversation today. And, we're going to use Ougat because Ougat is a newer book. We're going to use Ougat as sort of the dovetail of a lot of the conversation. But we really thought that Terry and Shana both did such amazing work with their books that we needed to bring these two fantastic people together in order to have conversations together. I think there'll be lots of vulnerability, lots of laughter today. But yeah, so Dr. A, let's get the show on the road.
So I'm excited to actually introduce Shana, who is a writer, a blogger, and female rights enthusiast who lives in the heart of the Cape Flats. Her work, especially her writing, revolves around the negative experiences she has had and witnessed in abusive relationships, the challenges and joys of being a young single mother, and finding a way to tackle mental health pitfalls while upholding the facade of being a fully functional human, because adulthood is a scam. It is a scam. It is a scam. Shana is now married, has 3 children, and is still continuing her work in the empowerment of women of all demographics. And she's the author of Ougat, From a Hoe into a Housewife, and then some. So yeah, she can turn a hoe into a housewife. Thank you.
Wait, I'm gonna go fetch my book. I also wanna be in. My book is too far. My book is too far. You'll see my whole room.
I'm just so in love with the title of this book, Shana, but we'll talk about it a little bit later.
Cool.
And then we also have the author of Those Who Live in Cages, Terry Ann Adams, who wrote a fantastic story about 5 women who hail from Eldorado Park, which is fictional, but in true, it sort of seems like autobiographical, not necessarily of her life, but of the lives of women who live there. And I think that both books' essence is about excavating the often untold stories of people who grew up either in the Cape Flats or who grew up in Eldorado Park. And we thought, what better way to do it than to bring these two people in conversation, just to think about like the ways in which they navigate. And I suppose the first question that we have for you, Shana, is this, like, Ougat, right? Like, for someone who is not like Afrikaans speaking and who picks up this book and is like, Ougat, what does that really mean, and why was that the title of the book?
So Ougat is an Afrikaans word, but it's also in the colored community, it's a Kaaps word, right? And it in normal Afrikaans, I think it means like cute, adorable. But where I come from, it's kind of a word that's used to describe a young girl who's interested in boys and sexual things at a very young age. So it's like a negative sort of take on the word. But that's why I used it, because it's a word that I've heard my entire life before I even. It's a rude word and it's an adult word, but it's used from when you're like 5 or 4. As soon as you discover boys, that word gets thrown around, and not just by the older people, by everybody.
I want to talk a little bit more about the title, because there's a play on like respectability politics, right? And so much of how young women are socialized, right? So the title of the book continues from a hoe into a housewife and then some, right? So your journey doesn't just end at what is seen to be the epitome of respectability, because now you're a housewife, and you know you've made it, mama, I've made it. And I want to talk about the and then some, almost as an antithesis to the ideas of respectability and being a wife being the pinnacle of like the kind of achievements that women should actually aspire to, because there's something so powerful and subversive, right, in the title, from a hoe to a housewife and then some. And I want to talk a little bit more about that, because I think those are things you explore so beautifully in the book, right?
Thanks. So and then some is basically me saying into being a housewife, as much as it was the goal. I don't know how do I put this? It's actually nonsense. That I don't know how we've been told since we are, at least I was told since I'm a very young girl, that is where you're going. No matter what else you do in your life, you are going to get married. So if you're educated, if you get a good job, if you anything, that's fine. But you're there to serve your husband one day. Every single lesson that I feel that I was taught was to eventually be marryable. That's not a word, but marryable, and then good at being married, or at least at being a wife. I think some people are good at being wives, but they're not good at being married. Marriage is a whole thing on its own. So the end then some is the realization after reaching this goal. Oh crap. that's not the pinnacle. I still actually have to figure this out. And in Ougat I say that it was fine for a while. For a long time, perhaps for the first 2 years of my marriage, I thought, okay, cool, I've made it. Lekker. And until I realized once that bliss goes away, there's so much more that needed to be uncovered. I needed to sort of unlearn a lot of the stuff that I was told. And even unlearn the hatred I had towards myself for not being married in the first place when I had my children. So yeah, then some is weighted.
I love that you're talking about unlearning, because I think that segues really nicely into a conversation that Tlokonolo and I were having about how so much of both your books really speaks to unlearning, right? I think that there's some important themes that come up in the book, but unlearning is a lot of them. So unlearning the ideas of who you are meant to be, and unlearning the ideas of what you're meant to do. I mean, in Terry Ann's book, we see one of the characters has a termination of pregnancy. And there are all of these ideas that are attached to what she should have done with her body and what she should have done in that particular context. And there's so much hatred, even directed to herself, right? And there's an unlearning that we see as so many of the women in those two books come to become themselves. And I'm curious about what we unlearn I'm curious about unbecoming and unlearning as a portal to unbecome in order to become.
Is that directed at me or Terry?
Both of you. It's yours.
I think it's both of you, but Terry, we'll start with you as well. And I think Shana mentioned something earlier in the conversation speaking about respectability. I think that Those Who Live in Cages also does really important work about like women who live in respectability politics, right? So there are women who either live in abusive relationships, and we'll speak more about that a little later on. There are women who live in like these communities, but there's a lot of respectability that comes with being in a particular community and socializing in a particular community. So I want you to share just some reflections about like what you were trying to do in Those Who Live in Cages around ideas of respectability, but more importantly, why it was important for you to also excavate this whole idea of unlearning to unbecome in order to become.
Yeah, man, I think I'm sort of the antithesis of Shana. I was this very proper Adventist girl growing up. And I went to a church. I think my first brush with respectability was the fact that I was not having Christianity. Like, I was not having it. It was not doing anything for me, and I was not having my questions answered. So my brush with respectability was me questioning adults and questioning theology. And then, I got called Ougat for that. So it was not necessarily, sexual in nature. And then I grew up and I had my whole feminism phase, and I went to varsity, and then I got married very young. I got married when I was 24. And like we said earlier, that's the pinnacle, like you're supposed to be married at, and whenever somebody asks me, why did you get married at 24? I was like, because that's what colored people do. We get married young. So I got married because there was a respectability issue with the two families. We were living together, but we were not married. And nobody was having khat and sit. Nobody was having that, not on either side. So eventually we were like, okay, well, we really love each other and it works out. It's not like we're going to not be married forever. So let's do this thing. Let's actually get married. And I think both of us, after we got married, myself and the husband, we had to then unlearn our ideas of marriage and gender roles and still eating your youth. And when we fell pregnant with Azaria, it was literally 4 months after we got married. So now we have to deal with like that as well. And everybody was so happy because the child was conceived in wedlock. And when I read Ougat, I wanted to cry because that notion that you mean nothing if you were not conceived in wedlock. I was not conceived in wedlock. My mom was 18. So what is this glorification of the legitimate, non-bastardized baby? And that's where those living cages came from, when I just realized that we're devaluing kids now because of respectability. And then it took a turn for me. It took a turn for the husband. We unfortunately lost Azaria, but by the time we got my son, we were at a point where we were not doing that, where we were not going to glorify him as the boy, the eldest boy of a family where it is in wedlock and it's middle class and everybody's got a nice job. And no, we were not doing that.
Yeah. Shana, what are some of your reflections? Or did you want to ask a question?
Well, I suppose what I wanted to say was this, right? I've been thinking a lot about, like, I think in many ways when I read Ougat and I'm reflecting it, I think Ougat is also sort of an unbecoming to become. It's a response to, like, I want to own my story and I'm allowing you into this part of my story because I want to own it. And so I wanted Shana to speak a little bit more about that, right? About this decision, because memoirs are already like intimate, right? Sort of like people know your things, right? And they know your things in the most intimate ways. So they kind of like, you go to a release and now suddenly someone knows who Shana is because they read Ougat, right? And I wanted to speak a little bit more about that, about like, I think your book is like hauntingly and searingly like honest, right? I found myself at moments being like, I wanted to go to you in that moment where you were telling the story and just like, hey, wake up, But then I'm also like, it's already happened, right? This person is reflecting on a life that's already been lived. And I wanted to, sort of speak about that, right? This idea of writing a memoir in the way that you did, but also writing this memoir.
So it's strange because when I was writing it, I sort of had to go back and put myself in the mindset of when I was a child and 21 and even up until 28 and when I got married and stuff. And I very much want to go and smack her. Like sometimes I thought, wake up, what are you? But I kind of needed to learn to understand that in order for me to be and break her down, she first had to exist. And it sucks because I still sometimes feel as much as she I refer to old Shana now as somebody external to me. She's still inside of me. She's still there. She's that inner being that I sort of kind of still have to raise and that first reacts in my mind before I say something, before present Shana says something, right? But like, oh, it's so hard to explain. A friend of mine also, after, like a good friend, a close, somebody that I is in my life now, messaged me when she was reading it, and she's like, I keep wanting to ask you what happens next, but I know you, so I know that this is what happens next. It's a very strange. I don't even know how to answer the question, but it is a very strange thing. I still haven't gone back and read Ougat again since it's been published, because it's still hard for me to sort of separate the feeling, because I know when other people read it, I understand it feels like a very honest sort of telling of someone's life. But when I read it, I've got all the pictures like fully in my head. I still feel, so I tried like the first part, and then I was like, no, 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 no. It's the same way I feel when Facebook memories come up, and then I was like, maybe next year I will look at but so it's still very much getting used to it. People do see me in now. I do get recognized a little bit more, not like super, like a lot.
Yes, Nicey. Yes.
But I feel it's in theory it's nice, except that like I don't know the person approaching me, but they know quite a lot about me. So it's sometimes uncomfortable. To be honest, like I went to the chemist once. I swear to God, I went to the chemist once and I needed a very intimate product. And the person was like, you Shana? And I was like, but I had to give my ID. So there was no hiding away from the moment. So I get moments like that, but that's as far as it goes. It's still pretty much the same.
I want to talk about something that for me really struck me about both books, and it was the idea of reimagining what family looks like. So Terry, in your book, I mean, we see people sort of have to reconfigure families. So you have these dysfunctional families. So you have nuclear families, but they are in many ways very toxic, very dysfunctional, right? And they are not the paradigm that they've been held up to be. And we see Shana then have a blended family and have to work out her own feelings about what that will look like and what that kind of family is going to be, and be very intentional about certain things in that blended family. So I'm really, really interested in like the reimagining of family, and why for both of you it was so important to speak about non-nuclear families as just being also the paradigm of what a family can look like and what family should look like in our context.
Cool. I think I'll go first and give Shayna's just a moment. For me, I needed Freddie and Bertha to exist because I needed people to see that just because it's mother, father, children doesn't mean everything is going fine. And the moment when it became mother, children, yes, Keegan, by that time, Keegan was already on drugs, but that time is where Janice got her autonomy. It was the decision that Bertha made to leave Freddie that gave Janice that sort of drive. It was the catalyst for her to want to take charge of her own life. So it's the breaking down of the nuclear family that actually then saves Janice's life. And I, even with Ati and Phyllis and Dean and Kaylin, that's not the perfect family. The father doesn't drink, and well, he drinks one black label, and the mother's Catholic, and it's great. But if that coldness, like it's so cold in the Abrams home. And I wanted to show that because I didn't grow up in a mother, father, sister, brother family. And I wanted to show that that thing that I wanted so bad is not the be all and the end all. I think Kaylin and Janice, I think they were family. Heta and Bertha, they were family. I think that family was more bonded over friendship in the book than actual relations to each other.
So for me,
In terms of, yeah, yes, Shana?
I was just adjusting my light. Sorry. So for me, I find this very interesting because I did grow up in a nuclear family. It was my mom and dad, and they were married, and they were Christian, and they were everything they needed to be, working, whatever the standard was. And I had a sister, and it was myself. And we lived in our own home. We had cars. We went to good schools. Everything was perfect on the outside, but it didn't feel like a family at all. Now it does. We've obviously, as life changes and we've grown and the relationships have changed. But from the outside, it looked like we had everything, but the relationship wasn't there. And that's what matters. And now I'm in a blended family. No one in my family right now is actually fully related to each other, except my youngest child is mine and my husband's biological child. That doesn't matter in my home. Everybody is everybody's family. But it's because we purposefully cultivate the relationship. My son and my husband are not related in any way, but they've chosen to work on being father and son. It's not something you can force, because I know dads who haven't spoken a word to their biological children in years because they don't know how, or just for whatever reason it is. I'm not blaming anyone, but there are reasons. But I also think that there is this idea that blended families are perfect. I know that sounds ridiculous. I'm taking it like to an extreme, but online, I don't know, like if you're on TikTok or you on YouTube, you see these like blended families give this perfect, like, oh, we all love each other, we've chosen each other. That's true, except nobody speaks about how difficult it is sometimes when, let's say, my husband needs to reprimand a child that isn't biologically his, and all the things that go through my head when that happens. Or even he's not, my husband's not abusive at all, but I get nervous if he has to raise his voice or be stern. And you wonder, is it because it's not his child? Is it because there's so many things that happen in a blended family, Even my daughter, my second daughter, Lyle's child. I was nervous for the longest time to have my husband put her to sleep without me there, because there's no biological link. There are so many things you need to worry about. Even if the person you are with is 100% fully functional, decent, everything, there's so many aspects of a blended family that you just don't rest. So I think it doesn't matter where you come from. Neither one is ideal. It's about the individual.
One thing that I was really interested in, which I think comes out from both Terry, your book, and also your Ougat, and I think more like directly in Ougat, is I'm trying to find, I think, so in chapter 4 of Ougat, you write, a lesser known fact about me, and to my family at least, is that I'm bisexual, mostly gay, yes, and a man. And I spent so much time being like, oh my gosh, because, I'm reading from a whole Into a Housewife and then some, and I'm like, okay, we're going to get to the end of the story, and, we're going to be living our best gay life. And then I get to the end of the story, and there's no best gay life, and I'm like, what is going on?
We're literally the same
really
person. We're literally.
What is interesting for me is thinking about this whole idea of compulsory heterosexuality. Sarah Hamed, who is a queer feminist theorist, speaks about these ideas of like these scripts that we constantly perform, right? So compulsory heterosexuality is something we're born into. And I wanted to speak to you both about that, right? About like, we often think about bisexual or gay people being in gay relationships, but we don't think about bisexual or gay people being in mostly heterosexual relationships, because as soon as they are in those relationships, it's like they are not gay enough, they are not queer enough. How do you want to own that identity but not participate in relationshiping in that way? And I want to just speak to both of you, because we sort of see in those who live in cages that there's a little bit of a hidden something there between Laverne and Ritabile, but nobody's really talking about it, right? And we know at the end they're like housemating, and we can only assume maybe they are coupling or maybe they're just housemating, right? But I wanted to speak to both of you about the idea of compulsory heterosexuality. And I think for you, Shana, why it was important for you to particularly speak about that, right, in this book, about the idea of like, I made the choices that I made, right, but I can't not acknowledge the identities that I hold.
I needed to, so I don't see it as, I was going to say I needed to come out, but it's not really coming out. The people who were close, by the time I wrote Ougat, my friends knew who I was. But not necessarily, like I said, in my family. It's just not something people, and I'm speaking only of the people I know from the colored community, Cape Colored community, specifically in the time I grew up, which is 90s, early 2000s. There was no place to be gay. If you wanted to be part of the family, there were, I didn't even identify as gay to myself, even though I knew everything I knew about me. I couldn't even say it to myself because it would be sinful. It would be, I can't even explain the turmoil of not wanting to disappoint people by being yourself. You know, how many friendships I thought were, oh no, we're just close, but we weren't just close. I was, maybe love is a strong word, but in love with these women. I was having relationships, emotional relationships. And then when my friends didn't understand me, or were like into boys and stuff, you want to be part of it. I was like, and I just go along with it. We'd kiss the boys and we'd let them touch us, and whatever you needed to do to be part of it. I was sort of attracted to men. So it was fine. I could get by. I have friends who are still dealing with trauma, who were not attracted to men, who now are living their full on truth, which is amazing. But not being able to express love for like 30 years, and that can hurt you, right? So I speak about having to, because I didn't find men great, but I kept being told that I needed to be with one in like a relationship or marriage capacity. I do think I overslutted myself. I was just bets to do anything with the boys. And like, if I look back, I think, why? It wasn't even liquor. Like 98% of those interactions were not fun. And I felt pregnant twice. What a waste of my vagina. It is like, it's devastating. But like, all I can do, so I felt like it was important because of how many colored people I know that are gender fluid or gay or bi, whatever they feel. I don't know what everything is, but whatever they is valid, and they must feel validated. So like, all I can do, and I'm gonna not be super long-winded, but all I can do now is raise my children openly. Like, I allow them to just be who we couldn't be. That doesn't mean I steer them in any direction. But if my son wants to wear a unicorn onesie and carry balloons to the mall, that's his vibe, If whatever it is, and I'm trying to, even though I'm married and in a heterosexual monogamous relationship, I've realized that I still let myself be who I wanted to be back then. I cut off all my hair because I fucking hate having long hair like a girl. It pisses me off. Sorry, I'm swearing. I apologize. I didn't know if we could swear. I'm sorry. I won't do it again. Or I'll... Oh my God. I just want to be authentic. And I feel like that's important because it can damage you. Oh, it can
Yes.
damage you.
Speaking about authenticity, right? I mean, I think about the intricate relationship between shame in both of your books, right? Shame, but also shame and desirability. So there are things about the ways in which people are shamed for their choices for the
Mm,
future, right? So you've made a decision now, and in the future, people will not find you attractive because you've now had this termination, or you have been soiled by this termination, or
Mm.
you now have a child, or you have two children,
mm,
and so much of the conversations, or so much of the themes in both your books are around the power of shame, right? But like the societal things that society places on you because they want you to be ashamed. So it's not necessarily that you have done something wrong, but it's the idea that other people around you want to be shamed. And so much of both your books is about breaking against the shame, or coming against the shame. And I want to talk a
Mm.
little bit more about that, right? About coming against the shame that other people impose on us, but also that we internalize, and breaking out of that as a revolutionary act for Black women, or for colored women, or for women everywhere, actually, because
Mm.
shame is just a weapon of patriarchy.
Mm.
Shoot. Firstly, I'm not crying because Shana made me laugh. Um, but I think shame is a currency. Excuse me. Um, Shame is a currency that is wielded and is weaponized by religion to keep genderqueer folk, homosexual, wow, Terry Ann, gay, and the rest of the LGBTQ community down, because there needs to be an ideal, and the ideal needs to be 2.5 children, white picket fence, that type of thing. And it starts early. My son watches YouTube videos to learn how to speak, and all those YouTube videos have nuclear families. There's a mother, there's a father. The mother's skinny, she exercises, they're white, they live in a middle class little neighborhood, and JJ goes to a play school, and in his play school there's a Latina, a Asian, a Hispanic, and a Black child, and everybody's equally represented there in the play school. And it's this idea of perfection that you need to have. So now when you have a uterus and nobody knows yet that you are either genderqueer or trans, and you are seen as a woman, your uterus and your vagina get weaponized against you when you turn 10, 11, 12, and you have that first period. And I was reading Shana's account of her first period, and how you're a big girl now. Um, and in Aldos, we say, yes, young Macy.
Mm.
But when you become young Macy, the first thing they tell you is, don't go fall pregnant.
Mm. Mm.
Not even like, oh, hey, welcome to the red club. No, don't go fall pregnant. And from that
Yeah.
moment on, you know exactly what the memo is. You
Mm.
know what you're supposed to be. And I saw it in my own teenage life. I was a bit like Kaylin in the book, like, where I would have these little, bash lives, and then I'd go home and I'd be really ashamed because I'm this Adventist girl that's not supposed to be like this. And even when my awakening came, my queer awakening came, in my matric year, it was the shame that pushed
Mm.
me to just be like, nope, not doing that. You are not this person, but she's
Mm.
lekker gebouw though, but no, 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 no.
Uh,
So
exactly
yeah,
that.
shame has ruled me so much that I really wanted to bring it out in the book. It's shame is the reason why I think Kloch is the first person I told him I'm genderqueer, and that was this year. And this is the first time I'm speaking openly as a queer bisexual person. That's
Mm.
what shame did. So I
Yeah.
wanted I wanted those who live in cages to uncage people from the shame that I was caged in.
Mm.
Latavanolo, do you want to say something? You're like frozen but not frozen.
I'm going through it all, right? Because I think like I think about like how shame has robbed so many of us, like queer folks, and I think also like cis women, of just owning yourself in your fullness, right? Because you are now like in your late 20s and you're catching up and doing things that people did in their 18, 19 things, right? And people are shaming you for that. And you're just like, I actually didn't have a period where I could do those things, right? Because I was like trying to be this perfect person and trying to not be this person who they told me I can't be. And now I know I can be, and sort of I'm playing catch up, right? But I also wanted to speak about shame in this context, right? In Ougat, Shana, you speak about masturbation, right? And I prefer with the term self-pleasure, right? You speak about you know encountering your clitoris, right? And it's been like an oopsie moment, but also like, oh, okay, like this is lovely, right? And how your mom finding you and shaming you sort of informs the relationship that you start having with touching yourself in order to pleasure yourself, right? And then how it feels like your vagina and your clitoris only can be touched and enjoyed by someone else, that it isn't a domain that you need to enjoy for yourself, right? And I wanted to speak about that particular shame, right? The shame of like you spoke earlier about the idea of like, because there was a lot of shame about having this attraction, I think there's also shame attached to the fact that like you were having sex with all these people because you're like, apparently I can't touch myself, right? So, but I know this feels good. Try and have it with as many people as possible. And I wanted to speak a little bit about that, right? About like the relationship that shame creates with desirability, with self-pleasure. And just for both of you to reflect on that, right? Like just desirability.
Yo, that was being told that pleasure is wrong. Is something that it didn't just affect my sexuality necessarily. Like any sort of indulgence you kind of get told is not okay. So, but to speak specifically on sexuality, and it's part of why I believe children should be spoken to about the entirety of sex. We sort of only speak about the function of sex, right? And obviously without perverting the conversation, I feel it very important for women to tell young girls and men to tell the boys about the fact that we have sex is it recreationally for fun or in a healthy way, because now as a grown up I still need therapy when it comes to relaxing my body and being present in the moment, when not necessarily when I have sex, but you know, you start out and you have sex, and then when it starts to become liquor, I disassociate. So and that I am 100% sure is because I was told to ignore those feelings, and I was told that no, we don't have sex because it's liquor. Sex is for your husband, sex is for babies, and now I can't fully function as I don't want to say as a wife because sex is not a duty, but just as a person with my partner. It is the most terrible thing. And so I think that comes from I like this particular thing, being caught masturbating as a 5-year-old. I had no idea so many women had that experience. So many people have spoken to me about that specific thing. And they were like, my mommy did the same thing. Oh, like she gave me imagine innocently finding your vagina and exploring it and getting a hiding and getting beat up every time because they were beating us up. Like hiding is a nice word for they beat me up when I was a child. Worst thing. Like, and that's embedded. I still sometimes think, I've actually had to tell a doctor this. I still sometimes think my mom is gonna walk down the passage and scare me out if I'm intimate with my husband. That's not normal, and I have to bring myself back to reality. I feel like my daddy's gonna be disappointed in me if I have sex. Oh, it's a trip. It's just So that's different.
The colored community, man.
Is it
Man, the colored community.
because it's bad.
Yeah, it's specifically to us. And that's why I'm saying the colored
Mm,
community, because
yeah.
your religion rules us, guys. I was
Like,
9 and my grandmother
sorry.
told me I would go to hell if I ever do that again.
Mm.
So that
I
informed
was
everything.
thinking about with the devil and
Yeah.
fire, like full on, full on.
Like burn for eternity, full on. So
Sure.
sure, it yeah. Then I was told that I better keep my virgin until I'm
Mm.
21, which I did. So I got a key, and they were very proud of me.
Sorry.
And
That key.
the
I don't know
person
what that key is for, but
oh,
that key
to
is a real
unlock all
story.
the
Are you a person
horribleness.
of life? You didn't get a key at your 21st. I got a key too, Terry. It's a
Yeah,
thing. It's an
I
actual
got
But
thing.
like, why?
I got the
Why?
virginal. I got the silver one on a chain, the virginal one. I got that one because and my gran was very stern, and God rest her soul, it's her birthday today, so she's going to be very angry in heaven that I'm going in on her right now. But she was very, very stern, especially when it came to sex. My grandmother was not a sexual being in the
Mm.
slightest. She
Mm.
always told us the sex is this thing you have to do when you have a husband. She despised my grandfather was very touchy, so she despised that. And all the women in my family seem to have that. Like I'm also not a very tender person. I don't,
Mm.
and it has affected a lot of relationships because I'm cold physically. And
Mm.
obviously the husband's like, nah, we're not doing that. You're gonna not be cold. We'll unlearn this shit together. So,
Yeah.
but it stems from my grandmother and her association with Shay, because she had 9 kids. So I can't
Yeah.
imagine the shame that came with that she then passed on down to the rest of us in saying that just don't have it, and when you have it, don't enjoy it, so that you don't end up
Yeah.
having 9 kids and no way to feed them. And I think it influenced me becoming a demisexual person, so I can only be physically with someone that I have a deep emotional bond with.
Mm.
And this resulted in me sleeping with one person for my whole life. And everybody always judges me for it. Like, what? No. Like, and but that was it. That happened. You see, he was there when I was 21, and it was him from there on out, because then he married
Yeah.
me, and I don't cheat. So,
Mm.
and I think even if anything were to happen, I don't think I'd be able to go and be physical with anybody because of that embedded shame, unless I have a deep emotional bond with them.
Mm.
Oh, I'm oversharing, my God.
No, I'm in. I'm listening to every single piece of it.
I'm blaming you. It's your book. Like I kept reading it, and my life. Yeah,
Our life
yeah. I'm
sounds
just
very similar to be even the grandmother who didn't have sex with 9 children. Identical.
Thank
Identical.
I want to talk a little bit about, because we've spoken about desirability, and I want us to talk a little bit about that. I mean, earlier on, Tlhogonolo and I were having a conversation about how people will self-love you to death, right? So anything that happens, you'll be told, just love yourself, man. Just love
Mm.
yourself, right? But there are also very real Eurocentric standards of beauty that exist, which determine who is considered desirable and who is not. And often, even in our communities, there's a recreation of these Eurocentric standards of beauty. So I think of like the colorism that both of you explore in your book, right? The
Mm.
colorism, but closely linked to that colorism is also the anti-blackness that comes through. So if you present in a particular way, there is the manifestation of that also in the desirability politics. And I wanted
Mm.
to talk a little bit about why it was so important for both of you to highlight desirability in your books, but also not just highlight it personally, but also to speak about the politics of desirability and why they influence the kind of decisions that people make.
Mm.
Shayna, I'm gonna let you go first. I went first the last
I need to think about that though. I need
time.
to. I need to
Okay.
really. I need some time to
Okay.
sit with it.
Shana, I
Please.
wanted to, while you ponder on that, right, I wanted to
Yeah.
add a little more of a little bit of a something there. I often return to, the scene of when you had just given birth and you are in your mother's home and Lyle says you need to go downstairs, and as you go downstairs, Lyle is basically like, let's fuck, right? And I think about desirability in that context, right? You already feel such shame, right? And such unwantedness because you've given birth, right? And you feel like, I'm in my parents' home, I'm this failure. And it kind of feels like you're just like, I don't think if anyone's going to love me or want me. And so I kind of want to give this person the sex that they want because I want them to desire me, because in this moment, I don't even desire myself. And so I kind of want to feel like I am still worth something. So while you think about like, anti-blackness and colorism and desirability, I also want us to talk a little bit about that, because that touched me so deeply, because I'm deeply interested in desirability. And I'm deeply interested in the decisions that we make as a result of desirability. I think oftentimes people don't allow us to speak openly and fully about like some of the decisions we've made in the past in order to be desired. Because, for some of us, we've been pushed to the margins like all this time. People have literally told you that anyone who looks like you, sounds like you, loves like you is not wanted. And so when you even get a little bit of attention, as Lyle gave you in that moment, right? You just go with it, right? And I think like logically, you're like, this doesn't make sense. But because of socialization and where we live, we just end up doing these things.
But also, I mean, to add a little bit to that, I think that it's a lot of the conversations around that are also very dishonest, right? You see how people in communities move around people who look a particular way. And you know that if you don't look a particular way, people move differently towards you. And no amount of like self-love is going to change the way that people move around you. And I've always found that a lot of those conversations are very dishonest, right? So even conversations around hair and like textures, and those conversations are very dishonest, because so much of that is also posited on the idea that you just need to love what you have and everybody around you will come to the fore. But when your entire life experience has been that people who look like you, who move the way that you do, have not been held up with like the same softness and vulnerability and gentleness that people reserve for other people, then of course you're going to move in different ways. And I think a lot of those conversations are also not honest and place the onus on you as the person who may not meet those standards to just like self-love out of like Eurocentric standards.
This is so true, jy gaan nou, jy gaan nou eerst.
I'll do my best to be brief. I want to answer all three of those things before I forget. So, I might not be directly answering the questions, but I'm going to try my best. The colorism and the anti-blackness, deeply embedded in my version of colored from when I grew up. I thought, and I'm going to go at this, but it's very important that people know I no longer hold these thoughts. This is what young Shana was fed. Blackness was not attractive. I was told that because my hair wasn't straight, I by no means have what people would refer to as cruise hair, which was a negative thing.
Cruise glad.
Yeah, but my for me, beauty, all my children cruise, right? I believe hair is hair, but I was told, me growing up early 2000s at school with my hair that didn't want to go straight and my skin that was dark and I'm fat and I've got very pronounced African / Khoisan / whatever features were not okay, right? I was made to believe that made me less worthy than the girl with the green eyes, straight hair and light skin. And that I didn't have the right to feel sexual. And I didn't have the right to have confidence. I couldn't talk to a boy because who does she think she is? Look at her. Dark, this, hair's cruise, fat, your stomach's not flat. It sounds superficial and stupid right now because I'm so glad that Gen Z them are fighting it. But for us millennials, that was a real thing. I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed of myself. I have cousins who are darker than me. I wouldn't go with them. They can't come with me to the school, Joel. I have black family. My from my mother's side, my grandfather is black, and we have mixtures of Khoi and loads of things that I don't quite fully know yet, but I am busy looking into my heritage. Right? I want to know things. My children ask me questions. Back then, to say that I was mixed with anything but white, they would laugh at me. The way we treated the darker children or the black children was deplorable. I went to a white school. My primary school, I speak of, my Catholic primary school was a white school. And I was there in 1996. So things had only changed for like a year. Like I was in the depth, and I was an outcast. I was told I was ugly. I write very briefly about the school play. Where because I was dark and thin and I didn't have straight hair, they made me a peasant. They blacked out my teeth and told us, no, the bigger girls, the bigger girls are the peasants. The pretty girls are the reindeer. The pretty girls are worthy of being the queen's reindeer. All of that embedded in my head. By the time I was a grown-up, I felt disgusting. I felt absolutely just ugh. So when boys wanted me, I was like, yes. It felt almost like validating and exciting. It was so exciting when people thought I was attractive. And people who looked like me hated themselves. So, like, what am I supposed to do? That's what we do. But when it came to Lyle and the specific, because by this time I'm already 25, right? I'm sort of in myself already, like I was, but at that time, I'm not developing anymore. I'm now a grown-up. I am who I am. Partially, I wanted him to love me deep. I wanted him to think I was the most attractive person in the room. So I would do whatever he wanted. But at that particular day, when he wanted me to go downstairs, because he'd been abusive up until that time, I had sex with him so that he could not make a scene. In that particular moment, I had sex with him so that he didn't alert my mother and my father to who he really was, because then they would have said I can't be around him anymore. And I didn't want to have another baby alone. That would have killed me. Even though, like, very shortly after that, I left him. In that, I grew so much in like 2 weeks. It sounds so stupid, but like, it was one of the things that I woke up. That was the year that I woke up. And I could see everything from a higher level or from the outside, and I was like, something is wrong here. But until then, I felt obligated to keep him pacified because it had been my job the whole time. If I didn't have sex with him that time, right, I would rather have been in pain than him have done something to embarrass my father again, or let my mother see that I'd had a baby with him and he hadn't changed. It was too much, and that's why I slept with him before I'd healed.
Actually, fuck Lyle, by the way.
Yeah, he was a terrible, terrible person. I don't know.
I just want to say this. I know we're going to get there, but I just want to say this. Do you know when Lyle, when that happened, that thing that happened, yo, I was shouting off the rooftops. I even called Alma and I was like, Alma, yo, I've never been so happy about someone I don't know.
It was just the relief, right? It was the relief that you felt. Like, that's what I felt when I read that point. I was like, the relief. Like, there's just a relief that comes, and we don't always have to be graceful and like bigger and better. Sometimes you are just relieved that something terrible has happened to somebody who was terrible towards you. And you know what? That is okay too, and that is your truth. And I think there's so much freedom in being able to feel the things that we feel about people who harm us.
I did feel shame though. Like you said earlier, shame is embedded in everything. And I felt bad that somebody who had hurt me so much got hurt. It's such a strange thing. But I mostly felt relieved. So it was the anniversary of his death on the 5th of September. Now, a couple of days back.
Wait a minute, he dies? I'm reading this book really slowly.
Sorry, Terry.
I'm past halfway.
I've got
like, we tried not to give it away, but I blame you. I want the records to reflect the Choconol and I tried to speak in the abstract.
I'm sorry, Terry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
My apologies. I'm so sorry. I'm
Guys, the
spoiler.
thing with Ougat is, Ougat is so close to home that I can't read it very fast
I
because
understand.
each 3 pages, then I go back to memory from my life. Okay, then we go back in, and then so I'm past halfway. You are with him, yeah.
Mm.
So, oh, this is
But then
great.
realize,
Yes.
Okay.
But
it
like,
realized he dies about 7 years ago.
first of all, Terry and Lyle, no, Lena,
I
like,
I have like
I kind of want to like, I want to have tea with you, right? And I want to have tea with you with the 25-year-old, right? And be like,
Mm.
baby girl, baby girl, baby girl.
Me too.
What
Very
is
much
going
so.
on? What is going on?
Very much
Because you know,
so.
the moment for me, right, was when you go to Lal's friend's house and you hear that he is like fucking stuck with that other Mexican.
I'm
And I'm
there.
like,
I'm there.
oh, I'm like, this girl is gonna leave finally. It's going to happen. Baby girl. And you're not leaving. And I'm like, why? What?
But
I
I
should
think
finish
what Shana's book does really well, right, is like to also look at the psychology of people who have been in relationships where they've experienced intimate partner violence, right? I think too often the rhetoric is just leave him, right? But what
Mhm.
Shana does in the book is to do a build up. And I think you see it as well in Terry Ann's book, where there is a build up to the physical abuse, right? Because there's an assumption that like, someone slapped you and you stayed. Whereas the reality is this person is a psychopath. So there was an insidious campaign and they worked at isolating you from your family and friends. They worked at destroying your self-esteem so that you're a shadow of who you are. By the time the physical abuse takes place, so much psychological abuse has taken place already. And I think that so much of what happens in both your books is really to speak against the culture that places the responsibility on the people who have been violated, right? Because often the conversation is, why didn't you leave him? But you can't read both your books and not realize why people didn't leave, or not realize why it's taken them so long to leave. And I guess I wanted to speak a little bit about the after. So the after the leaving, and what it means to reimagine love and healing after experiencing trauma, because we see it in both of your books that even after so much happens, there is love and there is healing that comes after that. And I'm curious about what some of your reflections for both of you are on that.
And I think also to say this, because I think Terry, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to do this to you, because like this is like a spoiler situation.
You know,
Wait, am
and
I
it's
still
fine.
able to?
It's fine because when I read it, it's still gonna be new because
Okay.
It
that's
will be
how
promised.
good that
It'll
book
be new
is.
at every page. You're just like but.
Lena, I mean, to add on to Ahmed's question, one thing that I'm always fascinated about, like, and even in my own life, is that sometimes we don't know that we need the healing that we get from being in loving, committed, beautiful, honest, authentic relationships. We actually don't know that like there are these parts of us that like have been deeply seated in trauma, that once we get a different type of things, it's like a knock for me. It feels like a knock to my gut. It's just like, oh, whoa, this is completely
Yep.
different to what I've experienced or what I've been a part of. And so I'm sort of wondering like about like the um the accepting, right, and the worthiness of being in and now this sort of wonderful, committed, beautiful relationship, right? As opposed to um knowing the trauma that you have, right? So like every now and then you tend to slip into something else because like that's what you know. So I suppose in thinking about healing is also thinking about like maybe healing also looks like love, that like sometimes
Mm.
the love itself is the healing, right? It's not like you're not healing outside of a vacuum. Of course you need to heal by yourself, but sometimes
Yes.
the love in itself is the healing that you need.
You want to go first, Terry? You
Okay.
want?
Sure. I think with when it comes to healing and relationships, I like so I was rereading Those Living Cages, and I thought, let me read my book as a person that reads. And when I actually read Bertha, I realized that throughout the book, she is healing with this relationship that she is building with Heta and with her talks that she's having with Phyllis and with so all of her friendships are actually the things that help her heal up until the point where she can stand up for herself when it comes to the Omalo meeting, where she can go to Heta and be like, this auntie, blah, blah, blah. She wants me to sell my house. That's not happening, blah, blah, blah. And she can actually tell Freddie, like, if you're a decent human being, you're going to leave me my house. And it takes a certain level of healing to get to that point, to look at your abuser in the eye and to confront them like borsti and bors. Um, I have never been physically abused, so I can't speak to that. I think I've been in a couple of emotionally abusive relationships,
Mm.
because of the desirability we spoke about earlier. Like, people think that if they are dating a person with albinism, you must be grateful because they chose you, because nobody's
Mm.
going to choose you because albinism is ugly. So I've been in a lot of those types of situations.
Mm.
And my like I said, the husband and I, we started dating when I was 20, but I've known him since high school. And he's been my best friend since I was 14. So when we
Mm.
actually started dating, I didn't realize that I was waiting for the emotional abuse. I was waiting for the, I'm with you now. So as a as
Yeah.
a as a girlfriend, so you must now be grateful. I chose you. Like, you must be very, very grateful. And I was also, when I walk down the street, as you would know, a lot of people stare. And so I was waiting for him to, because a lot of my past boyfriends would get very aggressive when we walk in the street
Mm.
and people stare at us. So I was waiting for him to get that aggression and one day he actually admitted to me that yes, it bothers him. But can we have a
Mm.
talk about this? If it bothers him, how does it feel for me? And that's when I
Yeah.
was like, okay, look at you communicating. And it was the first time I realized that you actually can talk through things. And yeah, we've been together for 8 years and married for
Yeah.
4. But we're still best friends. That's it. We're best friends. Before we married. And that was
Mm.
it was trippy in the beginning.
That's very important. I think that's very important. The whole best friend thing, friends before anything else is. It sounds so tacky, but it's a real thing that I don't think I've ever been friends with my partner until my husband, and the relationship is very different because there's a loyalty that's in friendship that you don't necessarily get
Mm,
in romantic relationships. But just on the topic of the leaving and the healing and stuff, leaving an abuser in my experience, a physical abuser, right, and an emotional one, and then going into a healthy relationship, the same way I didn't believe that Lyle actually wanted to hurt me. Like, there's that, because we were like brassa first, and then the hitting was only sometimes. That's not really who he is. As much as I didn't
mm,
believe that really who he was, when I went into a healthy relationship, I didn't believe that my husband wasn't like that.
mm,
I full on just switched places. I also found myself waiting for the escalation, just waiting. But this time I was very much ready to fight. Instead of being, because I was
mm,
cross with Shana, I was very cross with her. So I was very in my ego. I was ready to take on anybody that was about to tell me anything that I didn't like, which was both needed at the time. I needed to build that up again, but also unfair because this man had no track record of doing anything bad to me at all. And every time he and I had a normal disagreement about something simple, we
mm,
don't like anything. Why did you leave the cup there? Who do you think you are to tell me what this cup is? It's my cup. I love cups here. I got just ridiculously the other side, you know? And that's what healing looked like. Healing was me, but I'd become abusive. Not on purpose.
Bridget.
Not I just
No,
lost my mind. You know, so it's hectic, man. I don't know how to explain. I would lose it. But now I'm still not here.
I love what
I'm
you're
fine
saying, right?
again.
I want to say
I'm
I
the
love
same.
what you're saying, right? Because sometimes I'm just like, the honest truth is like, because you've been so hurt, right? And because you've been so discarded, like you're constantly operating from that mind frame, right? Where you are
Yeah.
just like, why are you asking me this question? Like, how dare you even like question my humanity? And how dare you do this, right? Because you're operating from a place of like, I know people have asked me these things and I know what the intent of those things were, right? And
Yeah.
unfortunately, right now I'm operating from a space of how dare you say I can't leave the cup there. I love cups.
I
Like,
love
you
them.
know,
That's my favorite cup. On my favorite place. It was bad, guys. It was hectic. And I needed help. At one point I was like, nah, something is not, something's not working out. But then you learn to sort of navigate the new person. And it does get better. I feel like it's very important to say it does get better, but not
Yeah.
not overnight. If I can add, just about why women don't leave. I think that there's this misconception that if they leave, particularly women who are married to or living with their abuser, from what I've experienced and a lot of women that I know that I've spoken to over the years since, abusers kind of disarm you on all levels. A lot of
Yes,
the women who are
definitely.
abused, they leave their jobs, they don't speak to their family anymore, they don't really have
Mm-hmm.
friends because they can't go anywhere. So by the
Yep.
time they want to leave, they're not necessarily going into a better situation by leaving the abuser's
Yeah.
house. It's just
And they have no
different on
money.
they have
Mm,
nothing. And they have children. A
mm.
lot of the time they have kids. So
Yes.
the abuser's been financially supporting me. I will just take all of this hurt and stuff. But my kids can go to school, they can eat, they have a roof over their head. They can,
Exactly.
So
They
it's
all
it's
have the same
not
father.
but
Mm.
also I
exactly
think
that,
what's also important is like the shame that's attached to it, right? Like, how dare you leave a marriage? Like,
Yeah.
how
Mm.
dare you? How dare you prioritize a who you know your grandmother stayed with that abusive man until he died, and now
And
you
she did
think
shame.
you in 2021 can
Mm.
leave? How dare you? So there's also like a lot of them. I think like just the social construction of the fact that like people aren't supported, that we don't have
Yeah.
Mm.
programs that are going to support these people. So we want them to leave these abusive situations to what? Who's
People
going to
say,
feed their
call
children?
me if you ever have a problem, but what they mean is call me after you've sorted it out, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Exactly.
once
Absolutely.
you've solved the
Exactly.
problem, call me, boo.
Mm.
Um,
So, Terry and Shayna, as you've seen, we've had a lit conversation, right? Because like
Mm.
both these books have ignited something in us. And I just want to say, like, Shayna, yo, ooh, this book, I'm going to like return to just when I need a little bit of a oomph. I'm going to remember that Lyle got what he deserved, right?
Let me
Because
actually
yo,
see if I can find my copy. You're gonna see
like,
my dear
I'm like,
Macaron. Oh wait,
Lyle,
here it is.
Lyle got what he deserved, right?
I feel so.
Ooh.
I feel bad, but I feel so.
Lyle
I'm
got what he
so
deserved, right? Because I think that in many instances, and I feel like it was like a culmination, that was a moment where you're like, I'm living my life, I'm doing best for myself, and then whoops, that's what
mm,
happens, right? And for me, I was like, exactly. You don't get to
Because you
do the shit
like
that you've
things.
done,
That's
and the
why.
world doesn't deal with you. No, it needs to, man. It just needs to. But just to
I really feel
say,
like there's some justice in the world, right? Like, because I think often people who look like us are at the receiving end of a lot of injustice, spoken and
mm,
unspoken.
Mm.
And there's
yeah.
just something about what that scene meant for so many people to feel like there is a relief, but that there's also an end, that there is like a
Mm,
palpable end to what you've been feeling. So Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. It does what it does. He got what he deserved. And that really is, it is what it is. But I think that just from both of us to say that thank you for what is a beautiful book. I'm so glad to see more colored women writing about themselves, writing themselves into the archive, writing about your experiences as well. There's just something so powerful about us giving ourselves the voices in spaces where we've been historically denied and telling stories that people have not always thought were important or were valued. And there's something to be said about the ways in which both your stories have resonated with so many people across so many different platforms who may not have grown up in the same environments that you have, but who knows what it means to live on the margins, right? To exist on the peripheries, to feel as though you are voiceless and you're not important. And I think that these books are doing such important work to write against those kinds of narratives.
And I think to add to that, it's also unmasking, shame. I think it's so important for us to begin to, I think honest and authentic living is when we unmask shame, because then they can't use shame against us. And I think that Ougat in many ways is that like, here is my shit. There's nothing you can come at me with, right? Because oftentimes, if people don't know your shit, right? It's like, I think about queerness in many instances, right? I posted this picture of myself on social media a day or two ago with like a full face of like face beat makeup. And someone said to
so
me,
fine.
thank you. And someone said, don't come complain at us when they beat you, right?
Oh my God, no.
And I was
No.
I was thinking about like how that was used to shame me, right? Like it was just like we're always used to being shamed and but when we are the authors of our own narratives, when we're saying this is the things that I'm putting out there, you can no longer use those things to shame me,
Exactly.
to keep me in secret, right? Because I think that violence exists in secrecy. When we don't name things, when we don't speak them out, they continue to perpetuate. It's like you were saying, Shana, at the when you were talking about like you had sex with Lal during that time because you needed to keep him quiet, because we know, and he knew that in the back of your mind, that's what you do. You wanted to be authentic. You didn't want to bring your good name to the family you already, he knew that. And so I'm grateful for the book, because I think the book allows us to tell us that shame, once I've told my thing, you can no longer hold it to me. So thank you for being so vulnerable in writing about it. I know for a fact that it wasn't an easy process, but thank you for also coming to speak about it, because in many instances, this may be re-traumatizing. And Terry, thank you so much also for writing Those Who Live in Cages. You know how Elma and I feel about Those Who Live in Cages. But also, again, it's this idea that both these books are sort of trying to uncage these women from wherever they are, whether it's respectability in the colored community, whether it's respectability in Aldous or at the Cape Flats. It's just to uncage these women and say that, like, you matter in whatever facets that you find yourself. So thank you both for absolutely wonderful, wonderful stories, but also thank you for this really enriching and wonderful conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for having me.
It was good. If I may add one thing, just one. Teddy, I got your book yesterday only. It was only delivered to me yesterday. And I started, I'm like 3 chapters in. But it was, I don't even know how to explain how myself, and I think her name Kaylin, I was just like, that was me. I was in there already, and it's the first chapter, and I'm just like, yo, that feeling of coming home and your mommy knows what's happening. Yo, that was real. That was like, I'm sorry, I love it. I'm in it now. I'm gonna finish it this evening because the kids are in here, so it's me and the book.
Listen, let me finish Ougat, then me and you are going to talk on Twitter, because I have some issues that I need to get through here. Thank you so much for this book. My word, colored women need to read this book. Oh, thank you.
Also, thank you to Chickinators who are watching from Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Thank you for always watching us. We'll see you again next Tuesday when we have another conversation about books. But for now, it's goodbye from myself, Letlhahonolo, and Dr. Slay. Mwah, 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 mwah. Bye.
Bye, guys.